Margaret Anderson never imagined that the biggest betrayal of her life would come from the person she loved the most in the world. The morning she walked into her 17-year-old son's bedroom and opened that worn blue notebook, she felt as if someone had quietly reached inside her chest and squeezed her heart until it hurt to breathe. She had always feared losing her son to bad influences, to the wrong crowd, to some distant future mistake. She never expected to lose him right here, inside their own home, in a way that would make her doubt every memory she had of him as a little boy. It all started with a missing $20 bill. Just $20. Such a small amount on paper, but it was the first crack in the glass. The kind of crack that looks harmless at first, then slowly spreads until the entire window shatters. On that Tuesday morning in Portland, Oregon, the sun was soft and pale behind the clouds, and the house smelled like coffee and toast. Margaret stood at the kitchen counter, her purse open in front of her, her brow furrowed as she counted the bills in her wallet for the second time. She knew exactly how much should have been there. She had checked the night before. She always checked, but the numbers didn't match. For a moment, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe she had tipped more generously than usual at the cafe. Maybe she had forgotten to log a small purchase. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in her throat. David had already left for work, his coffee mug still on the counter, a ring of brown at the bottom. Connor was still asleep upstairs, his music faintly audible through the floor. The house felt normal, ordinary, safe. And yet that missing bill sat in her mind like a tiny alarm that refused to turn off. Margaret prided herself on being careful. She was the one who remembered every due date, every school form, every bill. She knew how much they spent on groceries, roughly how many times they ate out in a month, the approximate cost of every recurring subscription. She was not the kind of person who simply lost money. So when she closed her purse and slipped it back into the cabinet, she also tucked away a quiet suspicion she did not dare name. The days passed, and life went on as usual. Or at least, it pretended to. Connor slept late, dragged himself to his summer classes, and spent most evenings in his room, headphones on, phone glowing in his hand. At dinner, he answered questions with one-word responses. Fine, nothing, whatever. He was a typical teenager, or so everyone said. Margaret tried to believe that. She tried to convince herself that what she was seeing was normal. But somewhere beneath the surface of her calm, something uneasy stirred. The second time money went missing, there was no way to dismiss it as carelessness. David stood in the bedroom doorway that Friday evening, his wallet in his hand, a frown pulling at his face. He joked that he was getting old, that maybe he had dropped the cash at the gas station. Maybe the clerk had shorted him. Maybe he had just miscounted. He laughed it off, but his eyes flicked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the room at the end where Connor's music was playing just a little too loudly. At dinner that night, David mentioned the missing $40 in a casual tone that wasn't casual at all. The fork clinked against his plate as he spoke. Margaret watched Connor carefully. Their son barely reacted. He shrugged, said he had no idea, and went back to pushing pasta around his plate. His face was calm, but there was a tightness around his eyes Margaret had never noticed before. Something guarded, something closed. She told herself she was imagining it. Mothers worry. That's what they do. They read too much into every expression, every pause, every sigh. But later that night, lying in bed next to David while the ceiling fan hummed above them, Margaret stared into the darkness and let the thought finally form in her mind. What if Connor is taking it? What if our own son is stealing from us? The next day, she watched him even more closely. The way he avoided eye contact when she asked how his day was. The way he grew irritated when she asked where he was going before leaving the house. The way his phone seemed glued to his palm, his thumb scrolling endlessly. He came home later and later, always with some vague explanation about being at Ryan's house or helping a friend with something. The stories were harmless on the surface, but they all had small holes, little gaps that didn't quite add up. Margaret buried her unease beneath chores and routines. Laundry, groceries, vacuuming, bills. She cleaned the smudges from the sliding glass door. She wiped down the kitchen counters until they gleamed. She told herself this was a phase, that Connor was just pulling away, as teenagers do, that every generation of parents goes through this same dance of distance and suspicion. But then came the day that changed everything. The pearl earrings went missing on a Sunday afternoon in July. It was a bright, clear day, the kind that made the whole neighborhood look like a photograph. Margaret had gone to her bedroom to get ready for a dinner party at her sister's house. She opened her jewelry box, expecting to feel the familiar coolness of the small velvet pouch that had belonged to her grandmother. Instead, her fingers brushed empty wood. She froze. Slowly, carefully, she moved aside her bracelets, a couple of old rings, a tangled necklace she never wore. The pouch was not there. She took everything out of the box and lined it up on the dresser. The earrings were not there. Her pulse began to race. She checked the drawer beneath, then the top of the dresser, then the nightstand, then the bathroom counter, as if they might have simply walked away on their own. But they were gone. Those earrings were more than jewelry. They were memory. She had worn them on her wedding day. She had worn them when she held Connor in the hospital for the first time, his tiny fist gripping her finger. Her grandmother had worn them on special occasions, her eyes always soft with pride when she clasped them in front of a mirror. To lose them was to lose a piece of her own story. And in that moment, the quiet suspicion Margaret had tried to ignore grew sharp and painful. When she told David, he went silent in a way that frightened her. He checked the jewelry box himself, then the drawers, then the entire bedroom, as if his determination could make the earrings reappear. It didn't. They sat together on the edge of the bed, the weight of the missing pearls pressing down between them. Neither of them said Connor's name, but both of them were thinking it. That night at dinner, Margaret watched her son with new eyes. She saw the way his gaze flicked away when David mentioned the earrings. She saw the way his shoulders tensed, almost imperceptibly. She heard the way his voice sounded too light when he said he had no idea, that he hadn't even known they were valuable. A small, cold silence followed his words, stretching out across the table like a shadow. The clink of cutlery felt too loud. Over the next few weeks, strange little patterns began to appear. Margaret noticed Connor's shoes were more worn than before, as if he had been walking farther than he admitted. She noticed a faint smell of something sterile and chemical on his clothes sometimes, like the lingering scent of a pharmacy or a hospital waiting room. She noticed that whenever she tried to ask follow-up questions about where he had been, he would gently, skillfully, steer the conversation away. At night, lying awake, she thought back to when Connor was small. She remembered the way he used to sneak into their bed during thunderstorms, clutching his stuffed bear, whispering that he was scared of the dark. She remembered the way he used to sit in the back seat, humming to himself on long car rides, his voice soft and tuneless. She remembered the way he had once cried because he accidentally stepped on a snail in the driveway and couldn't stop apologizing for hurting something so small. That boy, the one with the aching compassion and honest eyes, could never steal. That boy would never lie. But that boy was gone, replaced by someone taller, sharper, harder to read. Someone with secrets, someone whose phone held more of his life than his parents did. The turning point came one ordinary Thursday afternoon in late August. The sky was heavy with gray, the kind of sky that made the whole world feel tired. David was at work. Connor had said he was going to a friend's house to work on a group project. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock loud in the empty house. She opened her purse and counted the bills in her wallet out of habit. $80. She checked the record she kept on her phone. It should have been $100. Her hands went cold. She walked through the quiet house, her footsteps soft on the carpeted stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. She had promised herself she would never be the kind of parent who snooped. She believed in trust, in honest conversations, in giving her son privacy. But trust is a fragile thing. And sometimes, love leads you to places you never thought you would go. She stopped in front of Connor's bedroom door. For a long moment, she just stood there, her hand hovering near the doorknob, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Memories flickered through her mind like flashes of light. Connor's first day of kindergarten, his soccer games, his awkward middle school haircut, his laughter echoing down the hall when he watched cartoons as a kid. It felt wrong to cross this line. But she also knew that something much deeper had already been broken. Slowly, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The smell of teenage boy hit her immediately. A mix of deodorant, laundry detergent, and something faintly musky, like sweat and old sneakers. The room was messy, but not unusually so. Clothes draped over the back of a chair, a backpack slumped on the floor, half-zipped. Posters on the walls of bands she didn't recognize, and one of a city skyline at night. The blinds were half-closed, stripes of pale light cutting across the bed. Margaret stepped inside like she was entering sacred ground. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for something that would make this easier, something obvious and undeniable. Instead, everything looked painfully familiar. The worn edges of his desk, the lamp he had picked out when he was 10, shaped like a basketball. The picture frame on his nightstand with a photo of the three of them at the beach, sunburned and smiling, back when things felt simpler. She started with the obvious places, the top drawer of his desk. Pens, crumpled worksheets, an old calculator with a cracked screen. Nothing unusual. The second drawer, a tangle of charging cables, a few forgotten candy wrappers, a small stack of notebooks. Still nothing. She checked the closet floor, pushing aside a pair of sneakers and a box of outdated video games. Just dust and socks and the faint, stale smell of teenage chaos. And then, behind the row of books on his shelf, she saw the corner of an old envelope, yellowed and bent. Her heart thudded painfully as she reached for it, her fingers trembling. She pulled it free and opened it. Inside was a stack of bills, folded and pressed together. She counted them slowly, each number hitting harder than the last. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 150, 200, 230. $230, hidden in her son's room while she and David had been quietly tracking missing money, quietly doubting themselves, quietly hoping they were wrong. In that moment, something heavy settled over her. It wasn't just anger. It was grief. Grief for the trust that had been broken. Grief for the version of her son she had carried in her heart, the one who could do no real harm. Grief for the realization that he had lied to her over and over, and she had believed him because she wanted to. But as she stood there with the envelope in her hand, a strange feeling tugged at her. The money, the hiding place, the timing. It all screamed guilt. Yet there was something missing. Something about this didn't feel like mindless rebellion or selfish greed. The bills were folded too neatly. The envelope was tucked away with care, not stuffed somewhere impulsively. There was an order here, a pattern she didn't yet understand. Margaret didn't leave the room, not yet. Some instinct she couldn't explain urged her to keep looking, to go one layer deeper. Her eyes landed on the bed, the rumpled comforter half hanging to the floor. Slowly, she knelt and lifted the edge of the mattress, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what was hidden beneath. There, pressed flat against the wooden slats, was a worn spiral notebook with a fading blue cover, its edges frayed and corners bent. It looked harmless, ordinary, the kind of notebook a student would fill with math problems or history notes. But as Margaret reached out and pulled it free, a chill moved through her. as if the room itself were holding its breath. She opened it to the first page, and what she saw made the stolen money seem like nothing at all. Before she could fully process the rows of dates, names, and dollar amounts scrawled in her son's handwriting, before she could even decide what she felt, rage, confusion, fear, the front door downstairs clicked open and closed. Connor was home. And now, with that envelope of cash in one hand and the mysterious notebook in the other, Margaret was about to discover that her son's betrayal was far darker, far more complicated, and far more heartbreaking than she ever could have imagined. Margaret's fingers tightened around the worn blue notebook until the cardboard cover bent under the pressure of her grip. For a long moment, she simply stood there in her son's room, the envelope of hidden cash resting on his unmade bed, the silence around her loud enough to make her ears ring. Her first instinct was anger, hot and sharp, the kind that makes your vision blur for a second. Her second instinct, just as strong, was something much darker. Fear. Not the vague fear she had been living with for months, but a heavy, cold dread that whispered that this was only the surface of something much deeper. She forced herself to sit down on the edge of Connor's bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. The notebook felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried something more than ink and paper. She flipped it open, expecting messy class notes, doodles, maybe a half-finished homework assignment. What she saw instead made her breath hitch in her throat. On the first page, written in Connor's hurried handwriting, was a date, early June. Next to it, a number, $20, then a short note, missing from Mom's purse. Underneath that, another line, a name she didn't recognize, then a single word beside it, groceries. Margaret blinked, unsure if she was reading it correctly. She turned the page. The next page was filled with similar entries, neatly lined down the paper. Dates in order, amounts of money, brief notes. From Dad's wallet, from kitchen drawer, old watch, card balance. Each one paired with a name, sometimes an address, sometimes a small description. Mrs. Chen, pharmacy. Mr. Roberts, electric bill. Martinez family, rent help. At the top of the page, written in capital letters, were 3 words: what I took, where it went. A strange feeling spread through her chest, something between confusion and disbelief. This wasn't a random stash of stolen cash. This was a record, a ledger, a confession and a justification at the same time. She kept reading. Page after page was filled with the same pattern. Money listed with precise amounts, dates, and sources. And beside each one, a destination that had nothing to do with Connor himself. No new shoes, no game console, no parties or clothes, or things that would make sense for a selfish, rebellious teenager. Instead, pattern after pattern of something else entirely. June 14th, $40, Dad's wallet, Henry W., medication. June 19th, $25, Mom's purse, Dorothy, cat food, plus soup. July 2nd, sold earrings, $200, Sarah M., treatment copay. Margaret stared at that last line until the ink seemed to blur. Her earrings, her grandmother's pearls, sold. Not traded with friends, not hidden to be worn in secret, but turned into money. And then, given away. To someone named Sarah, for something as heavy as a medical treatment. She whispered the name without meaning to. Sarah. The word felt foreign in her mouth, and yet suddenly central to everything. The notebook continued. There were notes scribbled in the margins. Observations in Connor's voice that she had never heard him say out loud. Henry looks worse when it's hot. Dorothy worries more about her cat than herself. Emma is scared but pretends not to be. That last name again. Emma. Next to it, in parentheses, daughter. Margaret felt her heartbeat slow and then speed up, uneven and unsettled. She flipped toward the back of the notebook and found a list of names and what looked like addresses or cross streets. Neighbors she had never met. People from parts of the neighborhood she rarely went through. Next to some of the names, Connor had written little reminders. Ask if they need help. Check on her after Monday. Figure out bus schedule for him. Nothing in that notebook excused what he had done. The money was still stolen. The trust was still broken, but it was no longer simple, no longer clean. The image of the careless, selfish teen she had started to build in her mind now stood next to another image. Her son, quietly writing names and tracking every dollar, as if making sure he never forgot what he had done, and for whom. Margaret set the notebook on the bed and stood up, her legs unsteady. She opened his closet, her movements slower now, more deliberate, as if she were searching not just for evidence, but for answers. In an old shoebox on the top shelf, she found a small stack of folded receipts, held together by a worn rubber band. She brought them down and spread them across the bed. There were receipts from the local pharmacy for items like insulin, heart medication, blood pressure pills, generic painkillers. There were grocery receipts with totals that didn't match what she usually bought. Canned soup, basic staples, baby wipes, discounted bread. Mixed in were a couple of prepaid card receipts from a gas station. None of them had their home address listed. All cash. All within the past 3 months. One of the pharmacy receipts had a handwritten note at the bottom. Paid in full. Thank you. SM. The handwriting was different from Connor's. Curvier. More tired. Margaret traced the initials with her thumb. SM Sarah. Something. The same name as in the notebook. The room began to feel smaller. Warmer. Margaret opened the window a few inches, letting in a faint breeze that carried the distant sound of a car passing on their quiet street. For the first time, she considered that maybe her son hadn't just been drifting away from them into some aimless rebellion. Maybe he had been moving towards something, towards someone, toward many someones, and he had used their money to do it. For a second, the anger returned, sharp and defensive. Who gave him the right to make that decision? Who gave him permission to hand out their savings, their possessions, to strangers? Their family wasn't rich. They budgeted, planned, saved where they could. The pearl earrings, her credit card, the missing cash, these were all pieces of their safety, their stability. He had no right to gamble with that. But then she saw a small folded slip of paper tucked behind one of the receipts. She almost missed it. She unfolded it with shaking hands and found a short, clumsy drawing done in colored pencil. 3 stick figures. A taller one with long, scribbled hair, a smaller one with shorter hair, and a third, medium-height figure with what looked like Connor's messy hairstyle. Above them, in big, uneven letters, a child had written, "Thank you, Connor." And underneath the drawing, in softer pencil, were the words, "For helping my mom. Love, Emma." Margaret sat back down hard, the bed creaking under her weight. For a moment, she could not decide what hurt more, that her son had stolen from her, or that he had hidden this entire world of people and pain and gratitude from her as well. Somewhere far off, a door closed. The sound of a neighbor leaving or arriving. A dog barked twice and then went quiet. The house around her, their house, suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if there were rooms she had never really seen before, secrets stored in corners she had never thought to check. How long had this been going on, right under their roof? How many nights had Connor walked past her in the hall, carrying burdens he never shared? A wave of guilt washed over her, nearly as strong as her anger. Had she been too distracted? Too busy? Too eager to believe that every slammed door and rolled eye was just normal teenage behavior? She thought back to little details that had flickered at the edges of her awareness and then vanished because she didn't look closer. The nights Connor came home pale and quiet. The unanswered, "Are you okay?" questions. The way he had started asking vague things about prescriptions, about insurance, about how much medicine cost. You never really listened. A small, cruel voice whispered in her mind. You heard him, but you didn't listen. She pressed her fingertips against her temples, trying to push away the thought. This wasn't the time to drown in guilt. She needed clarity. She needed to understand who these people were, why her son had chosen them, what exactly he had been doing with their money. She flipped to the back of the notebook again and found a page labeled simply, Them. Underneath, his list of names was organized into rough categories. Henry W., 73, heart issues, lives alone, retired mechanic, stubborn but kind. Dorothy C., mid-60s, widowed, cat named Pepper, arthritis, worries about food. Mr. Roberts, late 70s, poor eyesight, prescriptions too expensive, forgets things. At the bottom, one name was underlined twice. Sarah Mitchell, early 40s, single mom, breast cancer, daughter Emma, 9. Out of all the names and notes, that one carried the most ink. Connor had written extra lines about her. About Emma missing school sometimes to stay with her mom. About Sarah working part-time at the grocery store between treatments. About the days she looked better and the days she looked worse. The word chemo appeared more than once. A cold, heavy realization began to take shape inside Margaret's mind. These weren't just random people he had bumped into by chance. This was a pattern of need, a quiet map of suffering, drawn by her own son, entirely without her knowledge. For a brief, flickering second, something like pride tried to surface. Pride that he cared this deeply, that he had noticed the invisible people around them, but that feeling was smothered almost immediately by another. The deep ache of being completely shut out. Why hadn't he told her? If he had just come to them, if he had just said, Mom, there's this woman named Sarah who needs help. Would she really have said no? Would David? Had they made their home feel like a place where compassion had to be hidden? The front door downstairs clicked. Margaret froze, the sound slicing through her thoughts like a knife. Keys jangled against wood. A backpack thudded to the floor. She heard a familiar, weary exhale. The one Connor always gave when he stepped inside, as if the outside world were heavier than he could carry. Panic and determination surged up inside her at the same time. She glanced at the notebook, the envelope, the receipt scattered across the bed like the pieces of a puzzle she had only just started to assemble. In a quick motion, she stacked them together in her arms and stood, her heart racing. This was it. The quiet suspicions, the missing money, the painful discoveries pressed between pages. It all led to this moment. For months, she had been guessing, avoiding, hoping the problem would reveal itself without her having to drag it into the light. Now the light was here. Now the truth was walking up the stairs in worn sneakers, probably scrolling his phone, thinking this was just another ordinary day. Margaret stepped into the hallway just as Connor reached the top of the stairs. He stopped when he saw her. His hand, still holding his phone, dropped a little. His eyes moved from her face to the notebook clutched against her chest, to the envelope of cash visible at the top of the stack, then back to her eyes. In that instant, the easy, practiced nonchalance he usually wore like armor disappeared. His expression went bare. Shock, fear, something like resignation. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The house was so quiet, she could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the soft rasp of Connor's breathing. "Mom," he said finally, his voice low and rough around the edges. "Connor," she answered. And even to her own ears, her voice sounded different, smaller, and at the same time, sharper. She didn't shout. The words that wanted to explode out of her. How could you? Why would you do this? Who are these people? Stayed trapped behind her teeth. Instead, she stepped aside and nodded toward his room. "We need to talk," she said. He didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or sighs or ask if it could wait. He just walked past her slowly, his shoulders tense, and went into his room. She followed, closed the door behind them. And in that small, cluttered space that had once been filled with toy cars and superhero posters, Margaret Anderson prepared herself to hear the truth she was no longer sure she wanted to know. And yet, even as she gripped the notebook tighter and searched for the right first question, she still had no idea that the real wound was not just about stolen money or broken trust. The real wound, the one pulsing just beneath the surface, was tied to a much darker secret her son had been hiding. A secret that would make every number in that notebook, every name on those pages, take on a meaning she never could have imagined. Connor sat on the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the notebook and the crumpled envelope of cash between him and his mother, as if they were two different versions of himself laid out for examination. Margaret stood near the door for a moment, one hand still on the doorknob, as if part of her wanted to step back out and pretend she had never seen any of this. But it was too late for that. The curtain had already been pulled back. What remained now was the painful, messy work of facing whatever truth lay behind it. She took a slow breath and walked farther into the room, closing the door gently behind her. The small click of the latch seemed impossibly loud. Connor flinched at the sound, just barely, the way a person flinches when a doctor reaches for the scalpel. He didn't look like a defiant rebel in that moment. He looked like a boy caught halfway between child and adult, unsure which one he was allowed to be. Margaret sat down in the desk chair, leaving the bed to him. She carefully placed the notebook and the envelope on the mattress between them like evidence at a trial. For a long few seconds, neither of them spoke. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with all the questions she didn't know how to ask and all the answers he didn't know how to give. When she finally found her voice, it came out quieter than she expected. "Connor," she said, "I need you to tell me the truth." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. His eyes darted to the notebook, to the envelope, to his mother's face. For years, those eyes had looked at her with open trust, with easy affection. Now, they were guarded, ringed with shadows she hadn't noticed forming. He pressed his palms together as if he were trying to hold something inside himself from spilling out. "You went through my stuff," he said, but there was no real accusation in his tone. It sounded more like a tired acknowledgement of something inevitable. Margaret didn't soften. "You stole from us," she answered, repeatedly, for months. The words hung between them like a blade. Connor flinched again, but he didn't argue. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He didn't make excuses. He simply nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Yes," he said. "I did." Hearing him admit it out loud made something inside Margaret recoil. For all the evidence, some part of her had still clung to the hope that there was another explanation, some twist that would make this all a misunderstanding. That hope died quietly in that single word. "Why?" she asked, the question cracking as it left her mouth. "Why, Connor?" He let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up in uneven tufts. For a moment he looked younger, like the little boy who used to insist on doing his own hair before school, always ending up with a wild halo of cowlicks. "It started with $20, he said slowly. "I didn't plan it. I swear. I just did it." She waited, her hands clenched together in her lap to stop them from shaking. "From my purse," she said. He nodded again. Shame flickered across his face, but it was tangled with something more complicated. Regret, yes, but also a stubbornness, a quiet belief in something she didn't yet understand. "I was walking home from school that day," he continued, his voice low. "I took the side street by Oak Ridge. I never go that way usually, but I was avoiding some guys from class. It doesn't matter. I cut through that street and I saw this old man sitting on his front steps." Margaret remembered seeing that street from the car, the older houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. They drove past it on the way to the supermarket, windows up, radio on, busy with their own lives. "He was just sitting there," Connor went on. "At first I thought he was just resting. But when I got closer, I realized he was crying. The image seemed to hang in the air between them. An old man, alone on a porch, crying where anyone could see, but no one stopped. "I could have kept walking," Connor said, staring at his hands. "I almost did. But he looked up at me, and I don't know, Mom. He looked so lost. He asked me what time it was, like he just wanted to say something to another human being. So I sat down. I didn't mean to stay long. But he started talking." Margaret's grip on her own knees tightened. This was not the story she had expected to hear. She had prepared herself for excuses about wanting things, about pressure from friends, about stupid teenage dares. Not this. "He told me his name was Henry," Connor said. "Henry Walsh. He said he just got back from the pharmacy. They told him his insurance wouldn't cover his heart medication anymore. He needed it to, not collapse or whatever. It costs $350 a month now. He showed me the paper." Connor's jaw clenched for a moment, the memory clearly sharp. "He said he had two choices," he continued. "Pay for the medication or pay his electric bill. He didn't have enough for both." He laughed when he said it like a bad joke. But then he started crying again. Margaret felt the room tilt a little. In her world, medicine was just something you picked up. Annoying, sometimes expensive, but never a choice between heat and survival. She realized with a small jolt of shame how little she knew about the lives lived just a few streets away from hers. "I didn't know what to say," Connor admitted. "I just sat there and listened. He talked about his wife who died 2 years ago, about how he hates asking for help because he doesn't want to be a burden, about his kids who live out of state and have their own problems. He said he didn't want to call them and scare them." He swallowed again, eyes glossy. "When I went home," he said, "I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how he was literally sitting there trying to decide whether to stay warm or stay alive." Connor's eyes met hers then, searching, almost desperate for understanding. "I know it was wrong," he said. "I know that. But I kept thinking. For him, it's just money standing between him and staying alive. For me, it was just paper sitting in your purse. I told myself I'd pay you back somehow. I told myself it was just this one time." Margaret's heart twisted painfully. She wanted to scream that it wasn't his decision to make, that their money was not some abstract resource for him to redistribute according to his conscience. But another part of her, the part that remembered teaching him as a child to help people, to be kind, to share, heard in his words the echo of lessons she herself had tried to instill. "And then it wasn't just one time," she said softly. He let out a humorless breath. "No, it wasn't." He gestured toward the notebook. "I wrote it all down because, I don't know," he said. "Maybe I wanted to make sure I didn't lie to myself about what I was doing. If I kept track of every dollar, every person, then I couldn't pretend it was just random. I needed to see where it all went." Margaret looked at the notebook again, at the neat columns of names and amounts, at the little notes by each entry. Henry, medication. Dorothy, groceries. Roberts, glasses. Sarah, chemo. "Tell me about them," she said, her voice trembling. "These people, Henry, Dorothy, Sarah. Tell me everything." He studied her for a second, as if trying to decide whether she really wanted the truth or just enough to fuel her anger. Then he seemed to surrender to it. "After I helped Henry the first time," he began, "he tried to refuse the money. He said he couldn't take that from a kid. But I insisted. I told him it was extra, that you gave me some for something and I didn't need it. I lied. But when I handed him that 20, he looked like he was going to break in half from relief. That feeling? It messed with me, Mom. It made me feel like I could actually do something that mattered." He spoke faster now, as if the story had been waiting just behind his teeth for months, desperate to be let out. "Henry introduced me to Dorothy a few days later," Connor said. "She lives 2 houses down. Her husband died last year. She has this old gray cat named Pepper. She was skipping meals to buy cat food and her arthritis meds. She kept saying Pepper was family, that she couldn't let him go hungry. She tried to joke about it, but you could tell she was scared too. Margaret pictured an older woman in a dim kitchen, opening a near-empty cupboard, deciding whether to feed herself or her cat. The image made her inexplicably ashamed of the untouched leftovers she sometimes threw away without thinking. "And then there's Sarah," Connor said, his voice softening in a different way when he spoke her name. "I met her at the grocery store. She was working the register the first time I saw her, and she looked exhausted. Not just tired, but wiped out. Like every movement cost her something." He glanced down, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "She was wearing a wig," he continued, "but you could see the edge of her scalp underneath. Pale. She was thin. Her arms shook when she lifted things. At first I thought she was just old, but she isn't. She's in her 40s. Younger than you." Margaret felt that comparison like a small slap. "I bought some stuff for Henry and Dorothy that day," he said. "When she rang me up, I asked if she was okay. She tried to do the usual I'm fine thing, but she looked at me and, I don't know, something broke. She said she was going through chemo, that she was trying to work as much as she could between treatments. She told me she had a daughter who was 9, Emma. She said Emma was scared but tried to act brave." He picked up a folded slip of paper from the bed, the drawing Margaret had already seen, and smoothed it out gently. "Emma drew this," he said quietly. "She gave it to me last week." Margaret's gaze locked on the stick figures and the shaky words. "Thank you, Connor. Love, Emma." "They needed help," Connor said. His voice cracked on the last word. "Real help. Not just someone patting them on the shoulder and saying, 'I'm sorry.' Henry needed medicine. Dorothy needed food. Sarah needed to pay for her treatments and still keep the lights on. Emma needed to believe her mom was going to be okay." He looked up at Margaret, eyes shining. "I know what I did to you and Dad was wrong," he said. "I stole from you. I lied to you. I broke your trust. I know there's no easy way to fix that. But every time I saw Henry breathing easier because he had his pills, every time I saw Dorothy smile when Pepper ate from a full bowl, every time Emma ran to tell me her mom had a good day, it felt like I was trading something I didn't deserve for something they desperately needed." Margaret's chest ached. There it was, the core of the conflict tearing him apart, and now tearing her apart with him. On one side, the love and respect owed to his family, to their home, to the truth. On the other, a fierce, almost reckless compassion for strangers who had become something more than strangers. "So you decided our money," she said slowly. "Our things, our security, were yours to give away. I decided I couldn't walk past them and do nothing," he shot back, a spark of defensiveness flaring. "You and Dad always told me to do the right thing, to help people who can't help themselves. You said that at dinner, you remember? When we saw that news story about the family who lost their house in a fire, you said, if we're ever in a position to help someone, we should." The memory surfaced in Margaret's mind, uninvited but undeniable. She did say that. She remembered the way Connor's face had lit up, the way he'd asked if they could donate something. They had given a small amount online, then moved on with their evening. "This isn't what I meant," she whispered. "But it's what I heard," he replied, his voice raw. "And then when I tried to talk about people like Henry or Sarah, you brushed it off. Dad said people have to be responsible for their own lives. You changed the subject. It felt like what you taught me and what you actually believed were two different things." The words hit hard. They were not entirely fair, but they were not entirely false either. Margaret remembered those conversations now. The way she had nodded vaguely when Connor mentioned some older guy on Oak Ridge who seemed sad. How she had been half on her phone, half thinking about a work email she'd forgotten to send. How many quiet cries for help had she stepped over without even noticing? Her eyes burned. "So you stopped talking to us," she said. "And you started this." He nodded again, looking suddenly very tired. "It felt easier," he said, "to just do it. To take what I needed from you and give it to them. I told myself I'd pay it back someday. Get a job. Save up. Put it all back before you really noticed. I kept thinking I had time." His voice dropped slightly on those last words, a subtle weight clinging to them that Margaret didn't yet understand. She leaned back in the chair, the edges of everything blurring. The betrayal was clear. He had stolen, lied, hidden. The love was clear too. Raw, clumsy, misdirected, but real. This was not a simple story of a bad kid going off the rails. This was a story of a boy trying to carry the weight of the world on shoulders that were still growing, and breaking their trust in the process. "I don't know whether to be furious with you," she said hoarsely, "or proud that you care this much." He laughed once, a broken sound. "You're allowed to be both," he said. "I think I am too." Silence fell again, thicker than before but different. Not the silence of suspicion, but of two people standing on opposite sides of a deep crack, finally willing to look down at it instead of pretending it wasn't there. Margaret rubbed her forehead, her mind racing. The ledger, the receipts, the stories of Henry and Dorothy and Sarah and Emma, they had all answered one question: where the money had gone. But another question loomed larger now, one that made her skin prickle. Why, she thought, did it feel like there was still something he wasn't saying? She studied her son's face, the way his eyes avoided hers at certain moments, the way his shoulders seemed to carry not just guilt, but some heavier, quieter burden, the way his voice had caught when he said, "I kept thinking I had time." A cold suspicion formed in the back of her mind, too terrifying to look at directly. She pushed it away, for now. "Your father needs to hear this," she said, standing slowly. "We're not done, Connor, not even close. But he needs to hear everything you just told me. All of it." Fear flickered through his expression again, but he nodded. He didn't argue. Maybe he was tired of hiding. Maybe he knew this reckoning was long overdue. As Margaret picked up the notebook and the envelope, preparing to walk out of the room and into a conversation that would shake their family to its core, one thought pressed hard against her heart. If her son was capable of this much secret kindness and this much secret harm at the same time, what else was he capable of hiding? She had heard his reasons, but she had not yet heard his whole story. And the part he hadn't told them, the part tied not to money, but to his own body, his own future, was about to rip through their lives like a quiet storm, finally breaking. Margaret walked down the hallway with the notebook and envelope pressed against her chest, as if holding them tighter might somehow keep everything from falling apart. Connor followed a few steps behind her, his footsteps slow and reluctant, the way someone walks toward a door they know will not open back to the same life. The house felt different now, heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. David was in the living room, the television on but muted, his attention fixed on his phone. When he looked up and saw Margaret's face, then the items in her hands, his expression shifted instantly. The tired annoyance of a long workday vanished, replaced by something sharper, more alert. His gaze moved from his wife to his son, then back again, silently asking a question he was almost afraid to put into words. Margaret didn't sit down. She walked to the coffee table and placed the envelope and notebook there with deliberate care, then stepped back, leaving them in the open, under the full light of the room. Connor stayed near the doorway, shoulders drawn up, as if hoping the frame could shield him from what was coming. "We need to talk," Margaret said quietly. David glanced at the envelope first, saw the edge of folded bills, and his jaw tightened. Then he saw the notebook, and the pages already creased from being read. The realization moved across his face in stages: confusion, suspicion, dawning understanding, and then a flash of anger. "Tell me that isn't what I think it is," he said, his voice low. Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Connor. The silence between the three of them stretched, taut and fragile. Connor swallowed. "It is," he said. "It's exactly what you think." David stood, the muscles in his neck stiff. "So it's true," he said. "You've been stealing from us." The word landed like a stone. Stealing. No softer phrase to cushion it. No room left for denial. "Yes," Connor replied, barely above a whisper. "I have." For a moment, David's anger surged to the surface, hot and obvious. His voice rose, then caught, as if he were fighting himself. "After everything we've given you, everything we've done." He cut himself off, pressing his lips together. He looked at Margaret, then back at Connor. "Why?" Margaret gestured to the notebook. "It's not just the money," she said. "There's more. You should read it." David hesitated, then picked up the notebook and flipped it open. His eyes moved across the pages, his face changing with each line he read. At first, there was the expected reaction, disbelief at the neat record of missing bills and items. But then, as he reached the names, the descriptions, the pattern of what I took and where it went, his anger faltered, tripping over something else, something like confusion and reluctant curiosity. He turned another page, and another. "What is this?" he asked, though the answer was already there in front of him. "Who are these people?" Connor shifted his weight. "They're neighbors," he said. "People around here. People who needed help." David looked up sharply. "With our money?" "Yes." The room filled with the sound of the muted television, a meaningless flicker in the background. Margaret watched her husband struggle with the collision of two truths. His son had stolen from him, and his son had used that stolen money to keep other people's lives from falling apart. David set the notebook down a little too hard. "You don't get to play hero with things that aren't yours," he said. "You don't get to decide we're the bank for every person you meet who has a problem." Connor's eyes flashed, but his voice stayed controlled. "They didn't just have problems, Dad. Henry was choosing between his heart medication and the power bill. Dorothy was skipping meals so her cat could eat. Sarah has cancer. She's got a 9-year-old daughter. It wasn't like they wanted new phones or something." The name landed in the room like a new piece on the board. "Sarah," David repeated slowly. "Sarah who?" "Sarah Mitchell," Connor said. "She works at the grocery store on Pine. She's—" The doorbell rang. The sound cut him off mid-sentence. All three of them froze, the tension in the air suddenly tinged with something else. Unease. Margaret and David exchanged a quick glance. No one had been expected. No one ever rang their doorbell unannounced at this hour. Margaret's heart gave a nervous jolt. "Stay here," she said automatically, then headed for the front door, each step feeling strangely distant, like she was walking in a dream she half remembered. She opened the door, and the dream sharpened into something painfully real. On the porch stood a woman in a simple jacket, her shoulders slightly hunched as if against a wind that wasn't there. She was thinner than Margaret, her cheeks subtly hollowed. A soft synthetic wig framed her face, and her skin carried the pale undertone of someone who had spent too much time under harsh fluorescent lights and around antiseptic smells. Beside her stood a girl of about 9, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands, clutching it like it was something important. "Hi," the woman said, offering a small, apologetic smile. I'm sorry to just show up like this. I know you don't know me. I'm Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I was looking for Connor." Margaret stared, her mind scrambling to match the name from the notebook to the living person in front of her. Behind the wig, behind the tiredness, there was a quiet strength in the woman's eyes. The girl at her side glanced up, brown eyes wide and curious, her grip tightening on the folded paper. "Connor is—" Margaret began, then stopped. There was no version of this that wasn't complicated. "Come in," she said instead, stepping back. Sarah hesitated on the threshold. If this is a bad time, we can... It is, Margaret said honestly. But I think you're part of why. Sarah's expression flickered, confusion crossing her features. She stepped inside carefully, as if afraid of tracking in more trouble than she already had. The little girl followed, her sneakers making small squeaks on the floor. In the living room, Connor had taken a step toward the doorway as if pulled by an invisible thread. When Sarah entered, his eyes widened in alarm. "Sarah!" he blurted. Emma's face brightened when she saw him. "Connor," she said, relief and happiness spilling out at once. David stood stiffly beside the coffee table, the notebook still open like a silent witness. He looked from Sarah to Connor to the little girl, puzzling the pieces together. Sarah's gaze fell on the notebook, on the envelope. Realization began to dawn, slow and horrified. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh no." Connor moved quickly toward her. "You shouldn't have come," he said under his breath, desperation in his tone. "I was worried," Sarah replied, just as quiet. "You stopped answering my messages. Emma was scared. We thought something happened." Emma took a small step forward, holding out the folded piece of paper with both hands. "I made this for you," she said. "Mom said we could bring it over when she felt okay enough to drive." Margaret looked at the drawing they had already seen upstairs, now offered again in the middle of the wreckage. 3 figures holding hands, a mother, a daughter, and her son. David cleared his throat, his voice just barely steady. "You're Sarah," he said. From the notebook. She winced as if the word itself stung. "I didn't know there was a notebook," she answered. "But I think I know what you mean." Her eyes shone with sudden tears. "He told you, didn't he? About what he's been doing?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Some of it." Sarah looked at Connor, guilt and gratitude tangled on her face. "I told you this would catch up with you," she whispered. "I told you your parents needed to know." Connor's jaw clenched. "And I told you they wouldn't understand." The words hit Margaret harder than she expected. She had always thought of herself as someone who understood, someone who cared. Hearing that her own son saw her as someone who wouldn't was its own kind of wound. Sarah turned toward Margaret and David, straightening her shoulders as if she'd stepped into a spotlight. "I'm so sorry," she said. "If I had known where the money was coming from, I would never have taken it. I thought he had a job, or that you knew and agreed. I should have asked. Her voice broke. "When you're choosing which bill not to pay while you're trying to stay alive for your kid, you grab at whatever help shows up. You don't always ask the questions you should." Emma's hand slipped into her mother's, small fingers curling around thin ones. David looked from them to Connor, his face pale. "So it's true," he said slowly. "You've been paying for medication, groceries, bills, treatments, with our money." Connor didn't look away. "Yes?" Sarah took a small, shaky breath. "He didn't just bring money," she said. "He brought meals. He watched Emma when I was too sick to get out of bed. He sat with me during chemo more than once when no one else could. He did more for us than some of my own family." She looked straight at Margaret now, eyes raw. "I know that doesn't make it okay," she said, "but I need you to know he's not doing this for fun. He's not out there wasting what he took from you. He's been trying to hold a lot of broken pieces together with his bare hands." Margaret felt something shift inside her. The betrayal was still there, sharp as ever, but now it had a face attached to it. 2 faces, actually. A tired mother clinging to hope. A frightened child who had drawn her son into their family portrait. "And you just accepted his help?" David asked, struggling to keep emotion from tipping his words. "No questions asked?" Sarah looked down, ashamed. "I asked," she said quietly. "More than once. He always said, 'Don't worry, it's taken care of.' I wanted to believe him. Maybe I needed to." She wiped at her eyes. "When you're drowning, you don't always check who's throwing you the rope." Silence settled over the room again. But it was different now. No longer a void, but a tense, fragile balance of competing truths. Connor stepped closer to his parents, not quite meeting their eyes. "I know you're angry," he said. "You should be. I lied, I stole. I kept all of this from you. But I need you to understand something." He glanced at Sarah and Emma, then back at his parents. His voice dropped, carrying a weight that made every syllable heavier. "This didn't just start because I met them," he said. "It started because of something that happened to me. Something I didn't tell you. And if you're going to hate me or forgive me or whatever you decide to do, you should probably know the whole story first." Margaret felt her stomach twist. The cold suspicion that had been lingering at the edges of her thoughts surged forward now. Impossible to ignore. "What did you mean?" she asked slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you said you thought you had time." Connor took a deep breath, as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff. "Because," he said, the words heavy, "I'm the one who's sick too." And in that instant, the ground beneath all of them shifted for the second time that day. Because the story was no longer just about stolen money or hidden kindness, but about a secret ticking silently inside their own son, changing the meaning of everything he had done. For a second, no one moved. The words hung in the air like something physical, something that had weight and shape and sharp edges. "I'm the one who's sick too." They seemed too big to fit inside the small living room, too heavy to belong in the mouth of a 17-year-old boy. Margaret felt the world narrow to the sound of her own breathing. The furniture, the walls, the muted television, even Sarah and Emma at the edge of the room. All of it slipped into the background. There was only her son's face now, pale and tense, and the echo of those words replaying in her mind. She heard her own voice as if it belonged to someone else. "What do you mean? You're sick?" Connor looked down at his hands, as if he couldn't bear to meet their eyes. "Back in March," he said slowly, "when I got really sick and you took me to the hospital. They found something, not just a virus." Margaret's stomach lurched. She remembered that week vividly. The fever that wouldn't break, the way he'd curled up on the couch, shivering, the fear that had gripped her until the doctor said it was just a bad infection. Just. She had clung to that word like a lifeline. "The doctor said it was the flu," she said, clinging still. "They gave you fluids. They sent you home." "They didn't tell you everything," Connor replied. His voice was steady, but his fingers twisted together in his lap. "They found something in my blood work. An abnormality. They wanted me to come back for more tests." He paused. I went, alone. The room shifted, as if the floor had tilted under Margaret's feet. "Alone?" David repeated, incredulous. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Because you were relieved," Connor said, finally looking up. "You were so happy when they said it was just a virus. You both hugged me in the parking lot and said, 'Thank God it's nothing serious.' You looked lighter than I'd seen you look in months. I didn't want to put that weight back on you yet." "That's not your decision to make," David snapped. But there was more fear than anger in his voice now. Connor nodded once. I know that now. But back then, I was just scared." He swallowed and continued. "When I went back, they did more blood tests, an ultrasound. They said my kidneys didn't look normal. They said I have something called polycystic kidney disease, PKD. It's genetic. It means my kidneys grow these cysts that slowly damage them. They said someday, maybe in 10, 15 years, maybe sooner, I'll need a transplant or dialysis." The words came out flat, like he had rehearsed them too many times in his head. Margaret felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Her body reacted before her mind did. Her hand flew to her chest, fingers curling into the fabric of her shirt. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be right. We would have known. We would have seen something. They said it can hide." Connor said quietly. "You can be fine for years, and then suddenly it shows up in your blood pressure, your kidneys, your scans. They said one of you probably has it, or a relative did. that it runs in families. He looked at them with a kind of helpless apology, as if he were sorry for the way his own biology had betrayed all of them. "We're going to the doctor," David said immediately, his voice shaking. "Tomorrow. All of us. You should have told us the second you found out." "I almost did," Connor admitted. "A bunch of times. I'd stand outside your bedroom door at night and just stand there. But you'd be talking about bills or work or how tired you were. And I'd think, they don't need this too. Not yet. I have time." There it was again, that phrase. I have time. "And then I met Henry," he continued. "And suddenly time felt different. I kept thinking, I'm probably going to get years, maybe a decade, maybe more if I'm lucky. But Henry, Sarah, they might not. I'm walking around with this expiration date I can't see, but they can feel theirs every day. So I thought, if I can't fix what's happening to me, maybe I can fix something for them." He let out a shaky breath. "That's when the stealing started to feel like trading something I couldn't control for something I could. Trading my future for their present. I know it sounds stupid. It probably is. But when you're 17 and someone tells you your body is going to fail you, your brain doesn't always follow the rules." Margaret's vision blurred with tears. In front of her, her son was torn between two impossible roles: the sick one and the savior. The child who needed protecting and the one trying to protect everyone else instead. "You thought your life mattered less than theirs," she said, her voice breaking. It wasn't a question. Connor's silence was answer enough. Sarah spoke then, her voice soft but firm. "Connor," she said, "you didn't tell me this part." He glanced at her, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I didn't want you to feel bad for taking my help." "Well, I do now," she answered, tears welling up. "You should have told all of us. You don't make yourself smaller so everyone else can stand up. That's not how this works." Emma moved closer to Connor, her small hand finding his. "Are you going to die?" she asked, the bluntness of a child slicing through everyone's careful phrases. "Emma," Sarah whispered, but Connor shook his head gently. "Not today," he said, forcing a small, crooked smile. "Not anytime soon if we can help it. That's why I need to stop acting like I'm already gone. And actually, take care of this." He looked at his parents again. "I stole from you," he said. "I lied. I hurt you. I know saying I was scared or I was trying to help people doesn't erase any of that. But that's the truth. I didn't do it because I didn't care about you. I did it because I thought, if I told you about me, it would break you. And if I told you about them, you'd say there was nothing we could do." Margaret felt those words hit with cruel accuracy. Had she become that predictable? The practical mother who worried about budgets and logistics and not about the quiet emergencies happening down the block? "I don't know who I am to you anymore," Connor said quietly. "Your son who betrayed you. Or your son who tried to keep people alive. Or just a stupid kid who didn't know how to ask for help without burning everything down around him." The silence that followed was thick with everything unsaid. Guilt, love, fear, anger, all tangled together until it was impossible to separate one from the other. Margaret crossed the room slowly, as if moving through water. She stopped in front of her son and really looked at him, not as the boy she remembered or the stranger she'd been afraid he was becoming, but as the complicated, broken, fiercely trying person he actually was right now. "You are my son," she said, every word shaking. "You are the boy who used to cry over snails in the driveway. You are the young man who sat on strangers' porches and listened to stories no one else wanted to hear. And you are also the person who took what wasn't his and lied to the people who love him most. All of that is true at the same time." A tear spilled over and ran down her cheek. "And now," she continued, "you are also a sick kid who thought he had to carry this alone." Connor's face crumpled. the last layer of defense falling away. "I didn't want you to look at me like I was broken," he whispered. Margaret shook her head. "You're not broken," she said. "You're terrified, and so am I. But we face that together, not apart, not with secrets." David stepped closer, his expression raw, stripped of all his usual certainty. "We're going to fix what we can," he said. "We'll get you to a specialist. We'll find out how bad it is. We'll do the tests. And if one of us can give you a kidney someday, then that's what we do. No discussion." "And the people I've been helping?" Connor asked, glancing at Sarah and Emma, at the invisible circle of names in his notebook. "What happens to them?" Margaret looked at Sarah, at the exhaustion and hope coexisting in her face. She looked at Emma, still holding Connor's hand like he was an anchor. "We don't stop caring about them," Margaret said slowly. "But we stop doing it like this. No more stealing, no more secrets. If we're going to help, we do it as a family. With limits. With honesty. You don't get to empty our lives to fill someone else's." It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was not rejection either. It was a fragile, trembling sort of truce, balanced on the hope that they could build something better out of the wreckage. Connor nodded, tears finally spilling over. "Okay," he said. "I'll tell you everything. Every name, every dollar. You can be mad. You can ground me forever. I deserve it. Just don't shut them out completely. They don't have anyone else." Margaret thought of the ledger upstairs, of Henry's shaking hands, of Dorothy's empty cupboards, of Sarah's chemo, of Emma's drawing, of her son living with a quiet countdown inside his body, trying to outrun it by pouring himself into everyone else. Her heart broke open in a new way then, not just from betrayal, but from the unbearable tenderness of realizing how hard he had tried, and how badly he had failed himself in the process. Outside, a car passed, headlights sliding briefly across the window before disappearing into the night. Inside, in that small living room, a family stood on the thin line between what had been and what might still be. They had not forgiven. They had not healed. Not yet. But for the first time, all of the truths were finally on the table. And that, whether any of them were ready to admit it, was the only place from which real redemption could begin. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Everything familiar but somehow blurred at the edges. Margaret woke up the next morning with Connor's notebook still on the kitchen table, its pages open to the list of names that had upended their world. David was already on the phone with their primary doctor, his voice clipped and determined as he demanded the soonest possible appointment with a kidney specialist. Connor sat quietly at the table, picking at toast he didn't eat, his eyes shadowed but clearer than they had been in months. Sarah and Emma left that night after more apologies and tearful hugs. Emma slipped Connor another drawing, this one showing him with a superhero cape, flying above houses with bags of groceries. Sarah promised to pay back what she could, though Margaret waved it off. "Just focus on getting better," she said, the words tasting strange but right. As they drove away, Margaret watched their taillights disappear, realizing that those two strangers were now woven into her family's story, whether she liked it or not. The doctor's visits came fast. First, Connor's full re-evaluation. The specialist confirmed the PKD diagnosis, but delivered a cautious update. The cysts were present but small, progressing slowly. With monitoring, medication for blood pressure, and lifestyle changes, he could have years, maybe decades, before needing serious intervention. "Plenty of people live full lives with this," the doctor said. "Early detection is your best weapon." Then came the family tests. Margaret's results came back first. She carried the gene, but her kidneys showed no cysts yet. David's were clear. The specialist explained it could skip generations or manifest differently. "We'll watch everyone closely," he said. Relief washed over them, fragile but real. Connor wasn't facing this alone after all. But healing the family fractures took longer. David grounded Connor indefinitely. No phone, no going out alone, mandatory family dinners. They sat around the table each night, the notebook between them like a conversation starter. Connor shared more stories. Henry's gratitude when he could finally sleep without chest pain. Dorothy teaching him to knit a scarf for Pepper. The way Emma's laughter filled Sarah's quiet house on bad chemo days. David listened, his anger softening into reluctant respect. "You had guts," he admitted one night. Wrong way, but guts. Margaret struggled most with forgiveness. She found herself staring at her empty jewelry box, fingers tracing the spot where her grandmother's pearls had been. Irreplaceable, like the trust Connor had taken. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, she sat with him in the living room. "I keep thinking about what you said," she whispered. "That you traded your future for theirs. Do you still feel that way?" Connor shook his head. "No. I get it now. My life matters too. Yours, Dad's. I can't fix the world by breaking us." Tears came then, for both of them. "I forgive you," she said finally, the words heavy but freeing. "Not because it's easy. Because you're my son, and love doesn't keep score." They started helping differently, no more stealing. Instead, the family pooled resources. David fixed Henry's porch steps one weekend. Margaret organized grocery drop-offs for Dorothy. Connor and Emma became pen pals, trading drawings and jokes. Sarah's scans improved, tumors shrinking, hope growing. She invited them to a small celebration when she rang the all-clear bell at her treatment center. Emma hugged Connor tight. "You saved us," she whispered. He looked at Margaret over her shoulder, eyes saying what words couldn't. "Thank you for letting me." Months passed. Connor returned to school, grades climbing as he channeled his energy into a community service club. He spoke at assemblies about invisible struggles, medical debt, loneliness, the hidden costs of survival. No hero worship, just honest stories. David opened up about his own fears, watching his father decline from untreated health issues years ago. "I didn't want that for you," he told Connor one night. "That's why I pushed so hard." Margaret found her own quiet transformation. She volunteered at the local food bank, connecting with people like Henry and Sarah every week. The pearl earrings? She didn't mourn them anymore. They had bought Sarah time with her daughter, worth more than gold. One crisp fall evening, the family sat on their own porch, the one Connor had never fixed but promised to soon. Stars dotted the Portland sky. Connor broke the silence. "I used to think time was running out," he said. "Now I think it's just starting." Margaret squeezed his hand. David nodded. In that moment, the betrayals felt distant, scars rather than open wounds. They had stolen from each other in small ways too. Assumptions, distractions, unspoken fears. But they had also given back, understanding, presence, a second chance. The lesson settled deep in Margaret's bones. Sometimes the people we love most hurt us deepest, not out of malice, but out of a desperate love we don't yet see. Connor's theft wasn't rebellion. It was a cry from a boy staring down his own fragility, trying to make meaning from it. Her discovery wasn't the end of trust, but the beginning of something stronger, forged in truth, tempered by compassion. Fear of loss had driven them apart. Facing it together brought them home. As the night deepened, Margaret looked at her family and felt peace, hard-won and precious. Connor was alive. They were whole. And in the houses down the street, Henry took his pills without worry. Dorothy fed Pepper from a full bowl. Sarah chased Emma around the living room, laughing. One boy's wrong choice had rippled out, breaking things but also mending others. Proof that even in our messiest humanity, redemption waits, not in perfection but in the courage to rebuild. What about you? Have you ever made a choice that hurt the people you love most, but came from a place of trying to do good? Drop your story in the comments. Did this hit home? Like, subscribe, and share so others can find hope in the heartbreak. See you in the next one.